Hello, sixth graders. Today you have a choice. You could read Chapter 2, The Three Estates, on your own, or you could follow along with me as we kind of read through and discuss it together. You will have some questions to answer at the end of the chapter, so like I said, you can do whichever you prefer, reading it individually or following along with me. One thing to pay attention to, though, is that Chapter 2, we did kind of start in the middle of the book here. So Chapter 2 begins on page 68. Okay, so Chapter 2 is called The Three Estates. I'm going to start off over here by looking at the big question. The big question says, what was life like for the people who belonged to the third estate compared to those who made up the first and second estates? So in other words, we're going to have some differences here between what is the third estate and then the first and second estate. So there must be kind of a big gap between what life was like for them. And we start off the chapter here with a quote, although it doesn't tell us who said it until a following page. It says, "Wretched individuals, of 20 millions of people supposed to be in France, I am of opinion there are 19 millions more wretched, more accursed, in every circumstance of human existence than the most conspicuously wretched individual of the whole United States." Okay, again, we're not told here who says this, but obviously whoever said this is not very impressed with France, because they're saying out of 20 millions of people, 19 millions are in very bad shape. They're having a really miserable life, okay? As a matter of fact, more so than anybody in the United States. Let's look and see who said that. So said Thomas Jefferson, who spent 4 years in France. Jefferson exaggerated. The most conspicuously wretched people in the United States were African American enslaved workers, whose lives were far worse than those of French peasants. Okay, I'm going to stop there for just a second. So Thomas Jefferson, being an American, obviously is going to think the United States is better than France. So after spending 4 years in France, he thought that their lives were much worse than people's lives in the United States. However, he didn't take into consideration the slaves in the United States, because our slaves would have had lives far worse than any of the people in France. So he did really exaggerate in that quote. Nevertheless, many French peasants were poor, and if their crops failed, as they often did, hungry. They occupied the bottom rung of a rigid social ladder, the ancient regime, or old regime, which had been in place for hundreds of years. Okay, so a regime is a period of rule. I just looked over in the vocabulary list here. So a period of time. All right, so we're going to talk about the three social classes. Medieval society has been divided into three classes. The clergy, I'm going to go ahead and maybe highlight that. The nobility, and the peasants. Whoops. By the 1700s, many things had changed, but France was still divided into the same three classes, called the estates. So the three estates are really just the same thing as having three social classes. When I think of estate, I usually think of like a building or grounds or something like that. But in this case, it's just talking about the different classes socially that we had going on in France. Okay, so the first estate is going to be mainly the clergy. And the first estate remained much the same. However, the gap between wealthy churchmen and poor churchmen had grown even wider. Most parish priests remained poor, while other church leaders were much richer and more powerful. As the official church in France, the Catholic Church had great power. Wealthy, high-ranking members of the French Catholic Church lived like princes in extravagantly furnished palaces. They often preferred to spend their time at the royal court rather than performing their religious duties. The clergy's wealth came from tithes. Tithes are kind of like offerings, something people would give to the church, and from rents on the land they owned. In fact, in the 1700s, the clergy made up less than 1% of the population, but owned 10% of the land. Although the clergy paid no taxes, they gave about 2% of their income as a gift to the state. Their wealth and large landholdings meant they had power in guiding the affairs of the nation. Okay, so the clergy would have been right under the king in terms of power. They had a great deal of power. They were a very small group, only 1% of the population, but it had a lot of control. But you could tell even within the clergy, there were rich clergy and there were poor clergy. Okay, moving on to the second estate. The second estate is going to be nobility and the aristocracy. The second estate, the nobility or aristocracy, had changed a good deal more than the first estate. For one thing, it was no longer a warrior class. Although most army officers were nobles or members of the aristocracy, France no longer needed armored knights to battle invaders. Overall, nobles owned 20% of the land. Some were not particularly well off, and most had only modest wealth, but a few were extremely rich. These few hired managers to look after their property while they lived luxuriously in Paris or at the royal court at Versailles. Nobles had many exclusive privileges. For instance, they didn't pay taxes. That's important. Except perhaps in wartime. Aristocrats were the only people allowed to hold the highest offices of the church and the government and the military. By the late 1700s, many aristocrats were willing to give up some of these privileges if the king granted them more political power. The first and second estates, so both of these groups that we've talked about so far, the clergy and the nobility, had a common interest, holding on to their wealth and power. That meant keeping things pretty much the way they were, unless, of course, they could weaken the king and get a little more power for themselves. Okay, so the first and second estates were mainly interested in just holding on to their power. They wanted to keep things exactly the way that they were. Okay, now we're moving on to the third group. Of all the groups, the third estate had changed the most since feudal times. It also had the best reason to want more change. I'm going to mark that because as we're reading in our literature book, The Scarlet Pimpernel, we know that a group of people in France did fight to bring about change. Everybody who did not belong to the first estate, which was the clergy, or the second estate, which would be the nobility, belonged to the third estate. That was 98% of the population. Okay, so in other words, all of the control has been given to only 2% of the population. Everyone else is living as part of this third estate. In feudal times, the third estate had been mostly peasants. Okay, so that's how it started off. But by the 1700s, a large middle class had developed within this third branch of the French social structure. There were still millions of peasants, but there were also doctors, lawyers, business people, merchants, manufacturers, writers, government workers, and craftspeople. Okay, so as time went on, we're not just talking about peasants here. We're talking about people who are contributing to their society, people that are intelligent, people that are educated, and people that are very skilled. But they're all still part of this third estate. Anyone who was not a clergyman or an aristocrat fell into this category. Classes within the third estate. Okay, remember the third estate is like 98% of the population, so a big group of people. So we can kind of divide this up a little bit too. All of the groups within the third estate had reason to be unhappy with the structure of French society. Okay. They had spent nearly all of the 1700s under the rule of an absolute monarch. Many felt it was time for a change. And we know that this change happened, again, because in the Scarlet Pimpernel that we were reading, or that we are reading, they do fight back and try to get change. The wealthiest group in the Third Estate was the bourgeois. Okay, so this is the wealthiest group. So these are not peasants. These are people who are not nobility. They weren't born into a noble status, but they are wealthy. Some were as rich as nobles, and they dressed like nobles, in powdered wigs, silk stockings, and tight-fitting knee breeches called culottes. They were members of the middle class. But no matter how rich they were or how well they dressed, the bourgeois were not of noble birth. Okay, so that's what held them back. They had not been born into a noble family. A few of the very wealthiest could purchase noble status. The rest were looked down upon by the nobility. Most had to pay taxes, though some bought exemptions. No matter how smart they were or how hard they worked, they could never be promoted to the highest ranks in the church or in the army. Okay, so they're going to stay as part of that third estate or lower class. By the 1700s, the bourgeois had developed a deep resentment. That's important. They do not like nobility. Deep resentment against the nobility. After all, the bourgeois argued, they were the ones who supplied most of the money, engaged in trade, and generally did the work of building the wealth of the country. Many nobles did little but sit at court, collect their rents, and waste time and money in silly games. And yet these idle, useless aristocrats had the nerve to look down on the middle class. The urban working classes within the Third Estate were nearly as poor as the peasants. They were stonemasons, furniture makers, butchers, weavers, servants, and other workers. Poorly paid, they lived in miserable, cramped housing and existed mainly on bread, eating as much as 3 pounds a day per person. Okay, so this is not the bourgeois. They're not as wealthy, but they're not as poor as the peasants either, so kind of in the middle there. A shortage of bread meant that they went hungry. The working class, especially in Paris, eventually became known as the sans-culottes, literally those without knee breeches, because they wore long trousers. Later, they wore red woolen hats to show support for the revolution. This term was used during and after the revolution. Okay, so now the third group would be the peasants. The peasants of France were better off than peasants in most other European countries, but they were the poorest members of the Third Estate, and the ones who paid the most taxes. These were the wretched individuals whom Thomas Jefferson wrote about. Imagine that you are a young girl, daughter of a poor peasant family in rural France in 1700s. What is your life like? First of all, your house is very small with a dirt floor. Your father keeps it that way on purpose. If he made any improvements to the house, it would be worth more, and he would have to pay higher taxes. Most of your time is spent working in the fields and garden, taking care of younger brothers and sisters. The fields and garden don't produce much, just barely enough grain to make bread for the family. You used to have to milk the cow and put cow manure on the fields for fertilizer. But last year the crops failed, and your father sold the cow for food to feed the family through the winter. However, it wasn't quite enough, and you and your brother were sent up to the main road to beg for food. You heard your parents talking the other day. They were upset because your brother's birthday was approaching and he was about to turn 7, and that too would mean more taxes. Your family has to pay a special tax. It's called a salt tax. Has nothing to do with salt. It's just a tax that you pay for every member of your household that's 7 years or older. On Sundays, you go to Mass at the village church. The priest is generally kind, but your parents are still angry that they have to pay a tithe of 10% of what they earn to the church. Yesterday, some men came and took your father away. Your mother said it would be okay. He was going to work on the main road to Paris, which needed repair. She assured you he would be back in a few days or maybe a week. Several other men from the village had to go too. Unfortunately, your father doesn't get paid for his work. Working for the government for free is a kind of tax called corvée, your mother says. But the family is lucky. At least they didn't take your father away to the army, which happened to some men in the next village. Most of those men never returned to their families.